A woman faked her death during surgery, and what her husband did 40 minutes later destroyed her. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story of betrayal and truth. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment where you are watching from. The aroma of roasted coffee mingled with the scent of blooming cherry blossoms that wafted through the window of the boutique Style and Essence, located in the bustling heart of Soho. Helena Smith adjusted the mannequin in the window for the third time, her hands trembling imperceptibly as she watched the street's activity through the glass. At 52, she had built a fashion empire amid the creative chaos of the New York neighborhood, but at that moment, her mind was far from the trends of the upcoming season. "Miss Helena, are you okay?" asked Carla, her longest-serving employee, noticing her boss's distant gaze. "You've been fiddling with the same piece for half an hour." Helena startled, returning to reality. Her brown eyes, always attentive to the smallest details, focused on the 28-year-old woman who was watching her with genuine concern. This was her trademark, reading people through. Subtle gestures, picking up nuances that others overlooked. A skill that had made her successful in business, but now felt like a curse. "I'm great, dear," she lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, just thinking about the spring collection. But the truth was quite different. For the past 3 months, Helena had noticed subtle changes in Richard, her husband of 25 years. Little things that an ordinary person would ignore. His phone turned face down during dinner, phone conversations abruptly cut off when she entered the room, the slightly different scent on his shirts. Almost imperceptible details that her analytical mind catalogued obsessively. Richard Smith, at 54, was the kind of man who aged gracefully. His perfectly styled grey hair and elegant demeanor had won her over decades ago when they met at a university party at NYU. He worked as a sales manager at a medical equipment company, a solid career that complemented her business success perfectly. At least, that's what everyone thought. "Carla, I'm leaving early today," Helena announced, taking off her apron and grabbing her bag. "I have a doctor's appointment." It was a lie. In reality, she had scheduled a meeting with Dr. Paul Miller, a general surgeon and family friend for over 15 years. What she planned to do was so extreme that she could hardly believe she was seriously considering it. Dr. Paul's office was located in an upscale area of the Upper East Side, in a medical building that exuded success and reliability. Helena knew those hallways by heart. She had accompanied her family to countless appointments over the years. Paul was more than a doctor. He was practically an older brother, someone she could always trust blindly. "Helena, what a pleasant surprise!" Dr. Paul stood up to greet her, his eyebrows furrowing as he noticed her tense expression. "But you don't look well. What's going on?" Paul Miller was 58 and had the appearance of someone who had dedicated his life to caring for others. Short, slightly overweight, with glasses that magnified his kind eyes, he exuded an aura of competence and confidence that calmed even the most anxious patients. "Paul, I need to ask you for a favor," Helena began, the words coming out with difficulty. "Something that will sound completely crazy, but I need your help." Dr. Paul gestured for her to sit in the armchair in front of his desk, his genuine interest piqued. "Go ahead, Helena. You know you can count on me for anything." "I want to test Richard," she said, taking a deep breath. "I want to find out if he really loves me or if—" Her voice faltered for a moment. "If there's someone else." "Helena, what kind of idea is that? You and Richard are one of the most solid couples I know. Where did you get this paranoia?" The tears she had been holding back for months finally began to flow. "Paul, I can read people. It's my gift and my curse. There's something different about him. Something has changed. He's more distant, more secretive, and I need to know the truth before it's too late." Dr. Paul leaned forward, his tone taking on a professional seriousness. "And what kind of test do you have in mind?" "I'm going to have the gallbladder surgery you recommended last month," she said, her voice gaining determination. "But I want you to tell Richard that I didn't survive the anesthesia, that I died on the operating table." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Paul stood frozen for long seconds, processing the madness of what he had just heard. "Helena, are you serious? This is—" He shook his head, incredulous. "This is unethical, illegal, and completely insane. I can't do something like that." "Paul, please," she pleaded, leaning over the desk. "You know my story. You know how my childhood was, with my father abandoning our family when I was 12, after promising my mother he would never leave us. You know how my mother promised me things would get better, and they never did. I can't fully trust anyone, not even the man I've loved for 25 years. Dr. Paul sighed deeply, removing his glasses and massaging his temples. "Helena, what you're asking me could destroy my career. And even if I agreed, have you thought about the consequences? What if Richard has a heart attack with the news? What if he can never forgive you when he finds out the truth? If he really loves me, he'll be devastated, he'll cry, he'll panic," she said with almost fanatical conviction. "But if there's someone else, well, then I'll know the truth. And I'd rather know now than continue living this farce." The rain began to patter against the office windows, creating a hypnotic rhythm. The tense silence between them was palpable. Dr. Paul knew that Helena Smith was a strong-willed woman, determined to the point of obstinacy. When something entered her mind, she didn't give up easily. "And then? How do you plan to rise from the dead?" he asked, still incredulous about the conversation. "You can say there was a mistake, that the machines failed, that you managed to resuscitate me at the last minute," she replied quickly, as if she had already planned every detail. "Paul, I just need a few hours. I just want to see how he reacts when he thinks he's lost me forever." Dr. Paul stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain turn the city into a grey blur. He had known Helena long enough to understand that she was capable of finding more dangerous ways to uncover the truth if he didn't help her. "If I do this," he said slowly, not turning around, "it will be the last time I accept one of your crazy requests, and you'll have to promise never to tell anyone that I participated in this charade." Helena jumped from her chair, relieved. "I promise, Paul. From the bottom of my heart, I promise." "Then let's schedule this surgery," he sighed, turning to her with an expression of someone who had just made the biggest mistake of his professional life. "But Helena, keep in mind that some truths are so devastating that we'd rather never have discovered them." The surgery date was set for a rainy Tuesday in September. Helena woke up at 5 in the morning, watching Richard sleep beside her, his grey hair spread across the pillow, his face relaxed and peaceful. For a moment she almost gave up everything. She almost woke her husband and confessed her paranoia, apologized for doubting him, for about to put both of them through unnecessary emotional hell. "Honey, is it time already?" Richard murmured, opening his eyes and meeting her gaze. His blue eyes, which she had fallen in love with decades ago, still carried that morning tenderness that made her melt. "Not yet," she whispered, caressing his face. 2 more hours." Richard stretched and pulled her closer. "Are you nervous about the surgery?" "It's just a gallbladder, Helena. Paul is the best surgeon in New York. You'll be fine." The irony of the situation hit her like a punch in the stomach. There he was, comforting her about a surgery she was using to test him, demonstrating exactly the kind of care that contradicted all her suspicions. But her obsessive mind quickly found alternative explanations. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was theater to mask his infidelity. "Richard," she said, hesitating, "if something happened to me, if I didn't come back from this surgery—" "Hey, hey," he interrupted, turning completely to face her. What kind of talk is that? Nothing is going to happen to you. I wouldn't let it. His words sounded genuine, but Helena had trained herself for months to question everything. But if something did happen, she insisted, what would you do? Richard was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning her face as if he wanted to memorize every detail. I would be lost, he finally said. Completely lost. You are my compass, Helena. Without you, I wouldn't even know which way is north. 2 hours later, they were at St. Helena Hospital, ironically sharing the same name as her. The activity was intense for a Tuesday morning, with doctors and nurses rushing through the white corridors that smelled of disinfectant and hope. Dr. Smith! Dr. Paul appeared, impeccable in his white coat, but Helena noticed the deep circles under his eyes and the tension around them. Clearly, he hadn't slept well since their conversation in the office. How is our patient? Anxious to get this over with. Helena forced a smile, squeezing Richard's hand. Richard, you'll wait in the third-floor waiting room, Dr. Paul instructed, avoiding Helena's gaze. It's a simple surgery. It should take about 2 hours. I'll come talk to you as soon as it's done. Richard's goodbye kiss was long and tender. I'll see you soon, love of my life, he murmured against her lips. As she was taken to the operating room, Helena watched Richard wave at her until he disappeared behind the double doors. Her last sight was of him taking his phone out of his pocket, probably to notify someone that the surgery was starting. The operating room was cold and intimidating, with halogen lights turning everything into a sterile white. Dr. Paul approached her as the team prepared the equipment. Helena, there's still time to back out of this madness, he whispered, away from the team's ears. Once I announce your death, there's no turning back. Richard will truly suffer. I need to know, Paul, she replied determinedly, even with her voice trembling. I need to know if he really loves me or if he's with me out of habit, out of convenience. The anesthesia took her quickly, and her last conscious memory was of Dr. Paul directing the team. When she woke up 2 hours later, she was in a special recovery room that Paul had prepared, away from the normal hospital bustle. How do you feel? A nurse asked, checking her vital signs. Confused, Helena admitted, still under the effects of the medication. How much time has passed? 2.5 hours, the nurse replied. Dr. Paul said you would wake up disoriented. It's normal after anesthesia. Dr. Paul appeared at the door, his expression grim. Helena, I did what you asked, he said quietly. I told Richard that there were complications, that you didn't make it. He is devastated. Helena's heart raced. Where is he now? In the hospital chapel, with Mary. Mary, her best friend for 15 years, a pharmacist, single, always present in their lives. A beautiful woman at 48, with impeccably styled blonde hair and a smile that could win anyone over if Richard was with her in such a traumatic moment. I want to see them, Helena said, trying to get up. You can't. Officially you are dead. Your movement could expose our facade. Then take me to a window where I can observe them without being seen. Dr. Paul hesitated, but eventually agreed. He helped her get dressed and led her through side corridors to an empty room that overlooked the hospital's inner garden. There was a bench under a pink flowering tree, and on it 2 figures that made Helena's blood run cold. Richard was hunched over, his shoulders shaking in silent sobs. Mary was beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding his hands in a way intimate, too intimate for mere consolation between friends. My God, Helena whispered, seeing her worst suspicions confirmed before her eyes. But then something made her pay closer attention. Mary wasn't looking at Richard with passion or guilt. Her face showed deep concern, almost maternal, and her words, though inaudible through the glass, seemed to carry a tone of urgency, as if she were trying to convince him of something important. Richard shook. his head vigorously, as if categorically refusing something. Mary insisted, pointing toward the hospital building, gesturing emphatically. It didn't seem like a conversation between lovers, but rather between two people discussing something crucial. "I can't hear what they're saying," Helena murmured, frustrated. Dr. Paul watched her with growing concern. "Helena, maybe you're misinterpreting this. Richard seems genuinely devastated. When I told him you had passed, he literally broke down. I had to call the emergency team because I thought he was going to have a heart attack." But Helena couldn't take her eyes off the scene in the garden. 40 minutes had passed since she supposedly died, and there was her husband being intimately consoled by her best friend. The physical closeness between them, the way Mary held his hands, the intimacy of the moment, everything seemed to confirm her worst fears. "I want to go back to the room," she said abruptly. "I want you to declare me resurrected in an hour." "Helena, an hour, Paul. I don't want to see anything more." As they walked back through the silent corridors, Helena felt as if her heart had been ripped from her chest, not from the surgery she had just undergone, but from the confirmation that her intuition was right. After 25 years of marriage, after building a life together, Richard had found solace in the arms of her best friend even before her body had cooled. The betrayal hurt more than any scalpel. The return to life was as dramatic as Helena had imagined. Dr. Paul burst into the waiting room where Richard remained prostrated, now accompanied not only by Mary, but also by Sarah, the couple's 28-year-old daughter, who had arrived from work with red eyes from crying. "Richard! Richard!" Dr. Paul shouted, breathless as if he had run through the corridors. "It's a miracle! Helena is back!" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard slowly lifted his head, as if he couldn't process the words. His face was swollen, his eyes completely red, his clothes wrinkled from sitting in the same position for so long. "What do you mean she's back?" Sarah was the first to speak, her voice still choked. Mother and daughter were very similar. Average height, the same wavy brown hair, the same expressive eyes. But Sarah had inherited her father's more explosive personality, while Helena was calculating. "The machines failed," Dr. Paul explained, following the script they had agreed upon. "There was an error in the vital signs reading. She was in a catatonic state due to a rare reaction to the anesthesia, but she never completely stopped breathing. We managed to revive her just now." Richard stood up unsteadily, with Mary holding his arm to prevent him from falling. Is she really alive?" His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Alive and asking to see you," Dr. Paul confirmed. What happened in the following minutes would be forever etched in Helena's memory. Richard literally ran through the hospital corridors, stumbling over stretchers, bumping into nurses, with Sarah and Mary trying to keep up with his desperate pace. When he burst into her room, Helena was properly positioned in bed, connected to the equipment, playing the role of someone who had just returned from the dead. "Helena!" he shouted, throwing himself beside the bed and grabbing her hands. My love, you're back! I thought I had lost you forever." His tears were real, abundant, wetting her face as he covered her hands with kisses. "I couldn't live without you, Helena. I couldn't breathe without you here." For a moment, seeing the genuine despair in his eyes, Helena almost confessed everything, almost apologized for doubting him, for putting him through this emotional hell. But then her memories returned to the scene in the garden. Richard being consoled by Mary, the intimacy between them, the physical closeness. "I love you," she murmured, studying every micro-expression on his face. "And I love you more than my own life," he replied, kissing her forehead. "When Paul said you had, I wanted to die too. I wanted to go with you. Sarah approached the bed, her eyes still swollen. "Mom, what a scare you gave." "Us? I was coming here prepared to organize your funeral." Mary stayed further back near the door, her eyes alternating between Helena and Richard with an expression Helena couldn't fully decipher. There was relief there, but also something more complex. Guilt, perhaps, or concern. "Mary, come closer," Helena called, watching her friend's reaction closely. Mary approached hesitantly. "Helena, what a terrible scare. When Richard called me crying, saying you had... I couldn't believe it." "He called you?" Helena asked, feigning innocence. "I was at work when I got his call," Mary explained, her hands trembling slightly. "I dropped everything and ran over here. I couldn't leave him alone at a time like this." The explanation sounded plausible, but Helena noticed the exchange of glances between Richard and Mary. Quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A gaze that carried secrets, complicity, something that went beyond mere friendship. "Thank you for taking care of him," Helena said, her voice laden with a double meaning that only she fully understood. In the weeks that followed, Helena returned home and gradually resumed her routine, but now with a clear objective: to uncover the truth about Richard and Mary. She began to obsessively pay attention to every detail, every conversation, every suspicious behavior. The first sign came 3 days after his discharge from the hospital. Richard was in the shower when his phone rang. Helena, who was making the couple's bed, saw the name Mary flashing on the screen. Without hesitation, she answered the call. "Hello?" she said, feigning nonchalance. There was silence on the other end, then Mary's voice, visibly embarrassed. "Helena, are you okay? I was calling Richard to see how you were feeling." "I'm great. Thanks for your concern. Do you want to talk to him? He's in the shower, but I can get him." "No, that's okay," Mary quickly replied. "I just wanted to check on you. Tell him I called." The call ended abruptly, leaving Helena with even more suspicions. Why had Mary been so nervous talking to her? Why didn't she want to wait for Richard to finish his shower? Helena's paranoia began to escalate. She started checking her husband's call history while he slept, observing his reactions when Mary was mentioned in conversations, analyzing every word, every gesture, every pause in their talks. A week later, during a family dinner at their home, the tension finally exploded. Sarah had brought her boyfriend, a nice guy named Brian, and they were animatedly discussing wedding plans for the following year. "You two are an example for us," Brian said, looking at Richard and Helena. 25 years married, and you still look at each other like you're dating." "The secret is trust," Richard replied, taking Helena's hand. "Absolute trust in each other." The irony of his words felt like a dagger to Helena's chest. "Really?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Absolute trust." Richard looked at her, confused. "Of course, love. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing," Helena forced. A smile. "I just find it interesting how sometimes we think we know a person completely, but in reality, we know nothing." The atmosphere at the table grew tense. Sarah and Brian exchanged uncomfortable glances, while Richard furrowed his brow, trying to understand what was happening. "Helena, are you feeling okay?" Richard asked. "Since the surgery, you've been different." "Different how?" she challenged. "More suspicious, more distant, as if you're looking for problems where there are none." His accusation infuriated her. "Maybe I'm just seeing things that have always been there, but I was too blind to notice." "What things?" Richard asked, his voice rising. "The calls, the secrets, the intimacy with certain people." Helena abruptly stopped, realizing she was revealing too much. The silence that followed was deadly. Richard stared at her for long seconds, as if he were seeing a stranger in place of his wife. "Helena," he said slowly, "I don't know what paranoia is taking over you, but it's starting to scare me. Since when do you not trust me anymore? His question was genuine, painful, but Helena had already plunged too deep into her suspicions to back down. Since when did you start lying to me? She replied coldly. Richard abruptly stood up from the table, throwing his napkin onto his plate. I'm not going to sit here listening to these unfounded accusations when you decide to talk like an adult. Come find me. He left the dining room, leaving Helena alone with Sarah and Brian, who watched her with a mix of concern and embarrassment. Mum, Sarah said softly, what's going on? You two have never fought like this in front of me. Helena looked at her daughter, seeing in her a younger version of herself, and realized that her suspicions were beginning to destroy not only her marriage, but the entire family harmony they had built over decades. That night, for the first time in 25 years, Richard slept in the guest room. The New Year's Eve celebrations arrived with their traditional explosion of colors and music, but in the Smith household, the atmosphere was one of mourning. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner fight, and Richard continued to sleep in the guest room. The couple's routine had become a silent ballet of mutual avoidance. He left early for work. She buried herself in the boutique until late, and when they met, conversations were limited to the strictly necessary. Helena had made a decision she considered inevitable. Sitting in the boutique's office, she flipped through the business card she had found online. Daniel Carter, private investigator, matrimonial and corporate cases, absolute discretion guaranteed. The store bell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Helena, there's a man outside wanting to speak with you, Carla announced, curious. Daniel Carter did not match the image Helena had of a private detective. Tall, dark-haired, well-dressed, around 40 years old, and with a confident smile, he looked more like a successful executive than someone who lived, investigating marital betrayals. Mrs. Smith, he greeted, extending his hand. Thank you for seeing me. Can we talk privately? In the office, with the door closed and the blinds down, Helena explained her situation. Daniel listened professionally, taking notes in a small notebook, occasionally asking pointed questions. Let me understand, he said when she finished. You suspect your husband is having an affair with your best friend, based mainly on his behavior after your surgery and some phone calls. I know it may seem trivial, but I know my husband. He has changed, Helena insisted, and the way he was. With Mary in the hospital, there was an intimacy there that was more than friendship. Daniel closed the notebook. Mrs. Smith, my fees are $3,000 per week, plus expenses. Typically, this type of investigation takes between 2 to 4 weeks to produce conclusive results. Are you sure you want to proceed with this? Helena hesitated for just a second. I'm sure. I need to know the truth. Very well. I will need detailed information about your husband's routine, places he frequents, times, and the full name of the alleged mistress. As she provided the information, Helena felt torn between the relief of finally doing something concrete and the guilt of betraying her husband's trust in this way. But her need to control the situation, to know all the facts, was stronger than any remorse. The first week of investigation brought exactly what Helena feared to find. Daniel called her at the boutique on a Friday afternoon, his serious face as he spread photographs across the office table. I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, he said, with compassionate professionalism, but your suspicions have been confirmed. The photos showed Richard and Mary in compromising situations, entering a hotel together in downtown, having an intimate lunch at a discreet restaurant, talking intensely in his car parked on a residential street. In one of the images, Mary was leaning against Richard's chest and he was stroking her hair. Helena felt the world collapse around her. Even though she had been expecting that confirmation, seeing it documented in color photographs was devastating in a way she hadn't anticipated. How long has this been going on? She asked, her voice coming out as a whisper. From my observations, at least 3 months, Daniel replied. They meet regularly on Tuesdays and Fridays, always in discreet locations, always careful not to be seen. 3 months, Helena repeated, feeling nauseous. Exactly when she had started to notice changes in Richard's behavior. Her intuition had been right from the start, but Daniel wasn't finished. There's one more thing, Mrs. Smith. Something that could be even more complicated. He placed a few more photos on the table. In these, Mary was entering a specialized medical clinic and a compounding pharmacy in the Upper East Side. Your friend is undergoing regular medical treatment. From my contacts, I found out that it relates to fertility. She is taking hormones to get pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. Helena looked at the photographs as if they were pieces of a macabre puzzle finally fitting together, revealing an image she could never have imagined. "They are trying to have a child?" she asked, incredulous. "It's a possibility we cannot dismiss," Daniel replied cautiously. Helena abruptly stood up, walking to the boutique window. Outside, the preparations for New Year's Eve celebrations were in full swing. Costumed people passed by on the street. Loud music came from a nearby block party, and life continued normally for everyone except her. "I want more details," she said, turning back to Daniel. "I want to know everything, where they meet, what they talk about, what plans they make, everything." "Mrs. Smith, it might be better for you to talk directly to your husband. Sometimes confronting the situation is less painful than prolonging the investigation." "No," she interrupted. "First, I need to know the whole truth. I need to have all the cards on the table before confronting him." Daniel sighed, putting away the photographs. "As you wish. I will continue the investigation next week." That night, Helena came home determined to indirectly confront Richard. She found him in the living room, watching the news. Such a normal domestic scene that it felt obscene in light of what she had discovered. "How was your day?" she asked, sitting in the armchair next to the sofa. Richard looked at her in surprise. It was the first time in weeks that she had initiated a casual conversation. "It was normal. And yours?" "Productive," she replied, observing every micro-expression on his face. "Richard, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "If you found out that I was having an affair, what would you do?" The question caught him completely off guard. He turned off the television and faced her completely. "What kind of question is that, Helena? Please answer. What would you do?" Richard was silent for long seconds, clearly processing not just the question, but the implications behind it. "I would be devastated," he finally said. "I probably wouldn't be able to continue the marriage. Trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. Even after 25 years together." "Helena, where are you going with this?" he asked, his voice gaining a rising tension. "Nowhere," she lied. "It's just a hypothetical question." "No, it's not." Richard stood up, walking to stand in front of her. "You are accusing me of something. For weeks you have been strange, suspicious, asking indirect questions. If you have something to say, just say it." Helena stared at him, feeling the weight of the photographs in her bag, the devastating revelations she had discovered. For a moment, she almost revealed everything, almost screamed that she knew about Mary, about the secret meetings, about the plans to have a child. But something held her back. Perhaps it was her controlling nature, her need to have all the information before acting. Perhaps it was fear of what would come after the final confrontation. "I have nothing to say," she lied again. Richard studied her for long seconds, his expression mixing frustration, hurt, and something that suspiciously looked like guilt. "Then stop with the indirect hints," he finally said. "Either we talk openly about what's bothering you, or we stop this game once and for all." He left the room, leaving Helena alone with her confirmed suspicions and the terrible certainty that her 25-year marriage was coming to an end. Outside, the sounds of the New Year's Eve celebrations continued, joyful and distant like echoes of a happiness she would never feel again. The second week of investigation brought a twist that Helena could never have imagined. Daniel sought her out on a rainy March morning, shortly after the New Year's Eve celebrations, with a confused and slightly embarrassed expression. "Mrs. Smith, I need to show you something that could completely change your perspective on the situation," he said. Placing a brown envelope on the table in the boutique's office, Helena asked, "Did you find more evidence about their case?" Mentally preparing herself for more painful photographs. "Actually, I found something quite different," Daniel replied, pulling documents from the envelope. "These are bank transaction statements from your husband over the last 6 months. Helena frowned. "How did you get this?" "I have my contacts," he said evasively, "but the important thing is what I discovered. Your husband is spending significant amounts of money, but it's not what you think." He spread the statements across the table. Helena saw transfers to medical clinics, specialized laboratories, and a substantial amount to a doctor named Dr. Edward Silver, an expert in autoimmune diseases. "I don't understand," she said, confused. "What does this have to do with his case with Mary?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Mrs. Smith, your husband is not having an affair. He is trying to find treatment for a disease he believes you have." The silence that followed was deafening. Helena looked at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "What do you mean?" "Apparently, he found your medical tests indicating an autoimmune condition. From the statements, he is consulting specialists, researching experimental treatments, even liquidating investments to fund a possible therapy." Helena felt the world spin around her. The tests. She had undergone a battery of medical tests a few months ago, investigating chronic fatigue that had been bothering her. The results had arrived while she was traveling for work, and she had left them on her office desk at home, completely forgetting to file them away. "The meetings with Mary," she started, her mind trying to reorganize all the pieces of the puzzle. "Your friend is a pharmacist, isn't she?" Daniel asked. "From the records I obtained, she's helping your husband understand the available treatments, contacting laboratories, researching experimental medications." The photographs she had seen the previous week took on a completely different perspective. The intimacy between Richard and Mary was not romantic. It was the complicity of two people trying to save the life of someone they loved. "But I saw the photos," Helena insisted, desperately clinging to her previous certainties. "They were hugging. She was leaning against his chest." "Mrs. Smith," Daniel said gently, "your husband was crying in that photo. Your friend was comforting a desperate man who had just discovered that his wife might have a serious illness." The reality crashed down on Helena like an avalanche. All her paranoia, all her suspicions, all her distrust, everything based on her inability to recognize true love when she saw it. "My God," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. "What have I done?" "There's one more thing," Daniel continued, clearly uncomfortable. "The visits to the fertility clinic that your friend was making, they are not for her. She was inquiring about egg preservation for you, in case the treatment for the autoimmune disease affects your fertility." Helena began to cry, not delicate feminine sobs, but deep, devastating gasps from someone who had just realized the magnitude of her mistake. "I ruined everything," she said through tears. "My marriage, my friendship with Mary, everything." Daniel watched her with professional compassion. "Mrs. Smith, perhaps it's time to have an honest conversation with your husband. He has the right to know about the illness, and you have the right to know about his efforts to help you." That afternoon, Helena cancelled all her appointments and went home early. She found Richard in the office, surrounded by medical papers, jotting down notes in a notebook. When he saw her, he quickly tried to hide the documents, but it was too late. "Richard," she said, her voice choked, "we need to talk." He looked at her with the expression of someone who had been caught red-handed. "Helena, I can explain—" "No, let me speak first," she interrupted. "I know about the tests. I know you found out about my autoimmune condition. And I know you're trying to find treatment for me." The look of relief on his face was immediate and devastating. "Thank God," he sighed. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to scare you, but I also couldn't just stand by and do nothing." "Richard, I need to ask for your forgiveness," Helena said, stepping closer to him. I thought you were having an affair with Mary." The confession left him, completely shocked. "An affair? With Mary? Helena, how could you think such a thing?" "Because I saw you two together at the hospital. I saw the intimacy, the secret calls, the meetings," she explained, the words pouring out in a torrent. "I hired a detective to investigate you." The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was not tense or awkward. It was the silence of someone processing a revelation that completely changed their understanding of reality. "You hired a detective," Richard repeated slowly, "to investigate me. I know it was terrible. I know I have no excuse. But I was so scared, so paranoid." "Helena," he interrupted, his voice surprisingly calm, "did you really think that after 25 years I would be capable of cheating on you?" The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. I don't know what I thought. I just knew something was different between us." Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where he and Mary had talked on the day of the surgery. "It's different because I discovered that the love of my life might be sick, and I didn't know how to deal with it. It's different because I'm terrified of losing you." "You're not going to lose me," Helena said, approaching him from behind. "It's not just that," Richard continued without turning around. "Mary made me promise not to tell you anything until we were sure about the diagnosis and treatment options. She said you were already stressed about the surgery and that finding out about a possible autoimmune disease could worsen your emotional state." The irony of the situation was almost Mary was trying to protect Helena, Richard was trying to protect Helena, and Helena was destroying all her relationships in an attempt to protect herself. "Does Mary know that you suspect her?" Richard asked. "Not explicitly, but I think she senses that I'm acting strange around her." Richard finally turned to face her. "Helena, Mary is being investigated by the pharmacy board because of the contacts she made, trying to get experimental medications for you. She risked her own career to try to help you." The guilt Helena felt transformed into something even deeper, an existential shame for misinterpreting the people who loved her the most. "What do I do now?" she asked, genuinely lost. "First, you're going to call Mary and apologize. Then we'll go together to Dr. Paul Miller to discuss your treatment. And lastly," he paused, "you're going to explain to me why, after 25 years of marriage, you still can't trust me." The question struck at the heart of the problem, touching wounds that Helena had carried since childhood. "Because my father promised my mother he would never leave us, and he did. Because my mother promised things would get better, and they never did. Because I learned that people lie, even when they say they love you." "I'm not your father, Helena," Richard said gently, "and you're not your mother. It's us, and our story is different." In that moment, for the first time in months, Helena realized she had a choice. She could continue to be a prisoner of past traumas, or she could choose to trust the man who had spent the last few months liquidating investments and consulting specialists to save her life. "I choose to trust you," she said, the words coming out like a solemn promise. "And I choose to forgive you," Richard replied, embracing her for the first time in weeks. Outside, autumn was beginning to paint the trees gold, and Helena finally understood that some seasonal changes bring renewal, not destruction. The call to Mary was one of the hardest conversations Helena had ever had in her life. Sitting on her porch, watching the golden autumn leaves fall in the garden, she dialed her friend's number with trembling hands. "Hello?" Mary's voice sounded cautious. "Mary, it's me. I need to talk to you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Helena, if this is about that day at the hospital, I can explain." "No, Mary. I'm the one who needs and to explain and apologize." Helena took a deep breath. "Can you come over? I need to talk to you in person." An hour later, Mary was sitting on the same porch, her well-manicured hands nervously adjusting the skirt of her navy blue suit. At 48, she maintained the natural elegance that had always characterized her, but Helena noticed the deep circles under her eyes and the tension around her green eyes. "Mary, I found out about the tests, about the autoimmune disease, about everything you and Richard are doing for me," Helena began, watching the look of relief spread across her friend's face. "Thank God," Mary sighed. "Helena, you don't know how hard it was to keep this secret. I wanted so much to tell you, but Richard was terrified of scaring you before we were sure about the diagnosis." "I know, and I also know that I misinterpreted everything." Helena paused, gathering courage for the hardest confession. "Mary, I thought you two were having an affair." Mary's reaction was so intense that Helena almost laughed, despite the seriousness of the situation. Her friend's eyes widened, her mouth opened, and she stood in complete silence for a few seconds before bursting into nervous laughter. "An affair? Me and Richard?" Mary shook her head, incredulous. "Helena, have you lost your mind? Richard is like a brother to me. Besides, you know I have serious issues with married men since that story with Paul when I was 30. The mention of Mary's ex-boyfriend, who had left a marriage to be with her and then abandoned her to return to his ex-wife, made Helena feel even more foolish for her suspicions. I know it was crazy of me," Helena admitted, "but I saw you two at the hospital, the intimacy, the secret calls." "He was crying, Helena," Mary exclaimed, "crying like a child because he thought he was going to lose you. And the calls were about medications, research, treatments. I risked my professional license making contacts with experimental labs." Helena's guilt intensified. "I know, and that's why I'm here asking for forgiveness, not just for the stupid suspicions, but for being so blind to not see how much you both love me." Mary stood up and walked to the porch railing, watching the street below. "Helena, can I ask you something? Why didn't you talk to me directly? We've been friends for 15 years. Did you really think I would betray our friendship like that?" The question touched the core of Helena's problem, her chronic inability to trust people, even those closest to her. "Because it's easier to believe in betrayal than in loyalty," she answered honestly. "Because I've experienced betrayal in childhood, and I'm still learning to recognize true loyalty." Mary turned to face her, her eyes filled with compassion. "Helena, do you know what the first thing Richard told me when he found out about your tests was?" "What?" "He said, Helena can't know yet. If she finds out she might be sick, she'll panic and that could make everything worse. We need to find the best treatment options first, so when we tell her, we can offer hope along with the diagnosis." Tears began to stream down Helena's face. "And I thought he was cheating on me. And do you know what the second thing he said was?" Mary continued, sitting back down. "What?" He said, "If I lose Helena, I die with her." "Helena, in 15 years of friendship, I've never seen a man love a woman the way Richard loves you," Mary's phone rang, interrupting the moment. She looked at the screen and frowned. "It's the pharmacy board. I need to take this." Helena watched as Mary's expression changed during the phone call. When she hung up, her face was pale. "What happened?" Helena asked, concerned. "I have to attend a hearing next week," Mary explained, her voice tense. "Someone reported that I'm making irregular contacts with labs. They could suspend my license." The reality hit Helena like a slap. "Because of me. You could lose your profession because of me." "It's not because of you," Mary said firmly. "It's my choice. I would do it all over again." "No, you don't understand." Helena stood up abruptly. "There's one more thing I need to tell you. I hired a detective to investigate you and Richard." This time, Mary didn't laugh. She became very quiet, studying Helena's face with an expression that mixed disappointment and shock. "You did what?" "I hired a detective. He has photos of you two, records of where you met." Helena explained, feeling smaller by the second. "Mary, it's possible that the report to the board came from his investigations." The silence that followed was painful. Mary stood up slowly, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the door. "Mary, wait!" Helena called. Mary stopped but didn't turn around. "Helena, I can forgive your suspicions. I can forgive you for doubting me, but I don't know if I can forgive the fact that you put a stranger to investigate me, knowing it could destroy my career." "Mary, please." "I need to think," Mary said, her voice controlled but cold. "I need to process all of this." She left, leaving Helena alone on the porch with the full dimension of her actions. Not only had she destroyed the trust in her marriage, but she had also put her best friend's career at risk. That night, during dinner, Helena told Richard everything. He listened in silence, his expression growing progressively darker. "Helena, do you realize that if Mary loses her license, she loses everything? The pharmacy, the house, everything she built," he said when she finished. "I know, and I will do everything to fix this." "How? How are you going to fix an investigation that has already happened?" Helena had no answer. For the first time, she was facing the real consequences of her paranoia, and those consequences went far beyond her own emotional life. "Richard," she finally said, "I need to confess one more thing." He looked at her with an expression of someone who didn't know if he could process more revelations. "The gallbladder surgery. I asked Dr. Paul to pretend I had died on the operating table. I wanted to test your reaction." This time, the silence was absolute. Richard became so still that Helena began to worry if he had understood what she said. "You did what?" he finally asked, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "I wanted to see how you would react if you lost me forever. I wanted to make sure you loved me." Richard slowly got up from the table, like a man in a trance. "You made me believe that the woman of my life had died to test my love." "Richard, I cried until I got sick, Helena. Until I got sick, I thought my life was over, and you were there, conscious, watching my despair as if it were a scientific experiment." The anger in his voice was something Helena had never heard before. It wasn't the raised tone of a common fight. It was the cold fury of someone who had just discovered an unforgivable betrayal. "You involved Dr. Paul in a medical hoax. You psychologically tortured me. You destroyed Mary's career." He counted on his fingers, as if making a list of crimes. "Helena, who are you?" "Because the woman I married would never be capable of doing these things." He left the house that night and didn't come back. Helena was left alone, finally understanding that her obsession with controlling and testing people had destroyed exactly what she feared losing the most: true love. 2 weeks passed without news from Richard. Helena tried, calling several times, but he didn't answer. Sarah, who had been furious to learn about the surgery hoax, was playing the role of reluctant mediator, only informing that Richard was fine but needed time to process everything. The boutique, which had always been Helena's refuge, now felt like a prison. She tried to focus on work, but her mind constantly drifted to Richard, to Mary, to the mess she had made of her life. Caroline watched her with growing concern. "Mrs. Smith, you need to eat something," Caroline insisted on a grey May morning, placing a sandwich on the office table. "It's been days since I've seen you eat properly." "I'm not hungry, Caroline. Look, I don't know what happened between you and Mr. Smith, but I know that withering away like this won't solve anything." Helena looked at the employee, a young woman from humble beginnings who had become almost like a daughter to her over the years. "Caroline, have you ever done something you regretted so much that you didn't know if you could live with the guilt?" Caroline sat down in the chair across from the desk, her expression becoming serious. "Mrs. Smith, when I was 17, I stole money from my grandmother to buy a dress for a party. She found out and was devastated, not by the amount, but by the betrayal. She died 2 months later without fully forgiving me. How did you deal with that?" "I learned that some things can't be fixed, only accepted, and that the only way to honor the people we've hurt is to become better people." At that moment, Daniel Carter appeared in the room. As Helena opened the door to the boutique, she felt a wave of tension wash over her. She hadn't spoken to him since discovering the truth about Richard and Sarah, and his presence immediately put her on edge. "Mrs. Smith, can I speak with you?" he asked, wearing a strange expression that she couldn't decipher. In the office, with the door closed, Daniel seemed nervous in a way that didn't match his usual professional demeanor. "Mr. Carter, if you came to collect the remaining fees, Helena began. "Actually, I came for another reason," he interrupted. "Mrs. Smith, I need to make a confession." The way he said it made Helena's heart race. "What kind of confession?" "Your daughter, Sarah, I know." "You her?" Helena furrowed her brow. "What do you mean you know her?" "We met a few times during the investigation. She worked in the same building where I was surveilling your husband. We started talking, had some coffees." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Smith, your daughter and I are involved." The world seemed to stop for a few seconds. Helena processed the information like it was a complex mathematical equation. "Involved how?" "We've been dating for 3 weeks and—" He took a deep breath. "She's pregnant." This time, Helena truly felt like she might faint. She leaned against the desk, trying to process the information. "My daughter is pregnant by the detective I hired to investigate my husband." She repeated the words slowly, as if hearing herself might make the situation make more sense. "Mrs. Smith, I know how this sounds." "How does this sound?" Helena exploded. "It sounds like my life has turned into a soap opera. My daughter got pregnant by the man I hired to spy on my husband, who I found out wasn't cheating on me, but trying to save me from an illness that I might not even have." Daniel remained silent, allowing her to process the emotional outburst. "And you're married," Helena continued, recalling the wedding ring he wore. "Separated for 6 months, he corrected. "The divorce is still in process, but my marriage ended long before I met Sarah." "Does Sarah know this?" "She knows everything, and she also knows about the pregnancy." Helena sat heavily in the chair. "Where is she now?" "At her apartment. She was afraid to tell you, especially with everything going on with your husband." "I need to talk to her." "Mrs. Smith, before you go, I need to tell you one more thing." Helena looked at him, with a mix of fear and exasperation. What else could have happened? "Sarah told me about the ruse with the surgery, about how you tested your husband's love." He paused. "Mrs. Smith, can I give you some professional advice? The way things are going, I need all the advice I can get." Stop investigating, stop testing, stop trying to control people. Sometimes the only way to find out if someone loves us is to have the courage to trust without guarantees. An hour later, Helena was at Sarah's apartment in Upper East Side. Her daughter lived in a small but beautifully decorated studio filled with plants and family photographs scattered across the shelves. When she opened the door, Helena immediately noticed that Sarah looked different, a special glow to her skin, despite the worried expression. "Mom," Sarah said, stepping back to let her in, "Daniel told me you two talked." "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Helena asked, sitting on the small sofa. "Because you were in the middle of a crisis with Dad. Because the situation is complicated. Because—" Sarah sighed, sitting beside her mom. "Because I was afraid of your reaction. Sarah, you're pregnant by a man. You barely know." "Mom, I know how this looks, but—" Sarah paused, her hands instinctively going to her still flat belly. "I'm in love, and he is too. He's still officially married. His marriage ended long before he met me. His wife has been dating someone else for months." Helena studied her daughter, her determination, her calmness in the face of an objectively complicated situation. "And what do you both plan to do?" "We're going to have the baby. Daniel wants to marry me as soon as the divorce is finalized, and I—" Sarah smiled for the first time in the conversation. "I want to build a family with him." "Sarah, you've known each other for less than a month. And how long did you and Dad know each other before deciding to get married?" The question caught Helena off guard. 2 months, but it was different. Different how? Because you were younger, because there wasn't a baby involved. "Mom, sometimes life happens fast, and we have to have the courage to embark on the adventure." Helena fell silent, watching her daughter. There was something in Sarah that she recognized. The same stubbornness, the same determination to control her own destiny, but there was also something that Helena had never had at the same age, the courage to trust. "Sarah, can I ask you a question? Aren't you afraid?" "Of course I am," Sarah answered honestly. "I'm afraid of being a single mom if it goes wrong. Afraid of not being able to balance my career and motherhood, afraid of a million things. But I'm not afraid of loving Daniel, and I'm not afraid of having this baby." "How can you be so sure?" Sarah took her mom's hands. "Mom, you taught me to be strong, independent, to build my own life. But I think you forgot to teach me to be afraid of love, and today I realize that was the best gift you ever gave me." Her daughter's words hit Helena in the heart. She had spent 28 years trying to protect Sarah from the disappointments she herself had suffered, but without realizing it, she had created a woman brave enough to embrace true love when it appeared. "Sarah," Helena finally said, "I don't know if I completely approve of your situation, but I approve of your courage, and I promise I will try to learn from you." "Learn what?" "To trust without guarantees." That night, back in her empty apartment, Helena finally understood that her journey wasn't about discovering if people loved her. It was about learning to reciprocate that love without fear. And for the first time in months, she knew exactly what she needed to do. Winter arrived in New York with its characteristic persistent drizzle, and with it came the first serious financial crisis of Helena's life. Sitting in the boutique's office, she contemplated the piles of bills on the table. Overdue rent, suppliers demanding payment, employees to pay. The last few months of personal turmoil had drastically affected the business. "Caroline, I need to talk to you," Helena called to the employee, who immediately sensed from the serious tone that this was not a casual conversation. "Mrs. Smith, judging by your expression, this isn't good news," Caroline said, sitting in the chair across from the desk. "It's not. Caroline, I'm going to have to let you go for a few weeks. I don't have the money to pay your full salary and—" Helena paused, struggling against tears. "I might have to close the boutique." Caroline was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. "Mrs. Smith, can I continue working just for commission on sales? I know it's tough, but I don't want to abandon you now." The young employee's loyalty touched Helena deeply. "Caroline, you have bills to pay. Your family depends on your salary. My family will understand, and if the boutique closes, I won't have a job anyway. At least by trying to keep the business running, we have a chance." That afternoon, Helena headed to the bank for a meeting she had postponed for weeks. The manager, Mr. Oliver, a middle-aged man with whom she had maintained a business account for over 10 years, greeted her with the serious expression of someone who already knew the reason for her visit. "Mrs. Smith, I'll be direct. Based on your transactions over the last 6 months, your business is facing serious cash flow difficulties. I know, Mr. Oliver, it has been a very atypical period. The problem is, we have several overdue installments on the financing for the renovations you made last year. If you can't rectify the situation within 30 days, we will have to execute the guarantees. The guarantees, the boutique, the house, everything she and Richard had built over 25 years was at risk. Is there any possibility of renegotiation?" "There is, but it would require a guarantor with verified income. Your husband would be ideal, but according to our records, he removed himself from the joint account a few weeks ago." The information hit her like a punch to the stomach. Richard had taken his name off the joint account. Officially, he was separating from her. I didn't know that. Mrs. Smith, may I suggest you seek a consultancy specializing in business recovery? There may still be solutions we aren't seeing." Back at the boutique, Helena sat in the middle of the main salon, observing the racks full of clothes that might never be sold, the mannequins she had chosen with such care, the full-length mirror where thousands of customers had admired themselves over the years. Caroline appeared with 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. Smith, can I make a crazy suggestion?" At this point, any suggestion is welcome. "What if we did a total liquidation? Sell everything, pay the most urgent debts, and then think about a fresh start? Caroline, if I liquidate the stock, there will be nothing left to start over. You still have your experience, your loyal clientele, your reputation in the neighborhood. Mrs. Smith, you built this boutique from scratch once. You can do it again." 2 weeks later, Helena was organizing the biggest liquidation in the history of Style and Essence. Posters scattered throughout Soho announced discounts of up to 70%, and a line of customers waited for the store to open. Sarah appeared in the middle of the morning, her little belly starting to show under the loose blouse she wore. In the 3 months since Helena had discovered the pregnancy, they had grown closer in a new and more mature way. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Sarah asked, observing the frantic movement of customers choosing pieces. "Strange. It's like watching the dismantling of my own life," Helena admitted. "Or like watching the beginning of a new phase," Sarah suggested. "Mom, can I tell you something? When I found out I was pregnant, my first reaction was total panic. I thought my career was over, that my independence had gone down the drain. And now I realize that sometimes we lose some things to gain even better ones. Maybe you need to lose this boutique to discover something new about yourself." In the middle of the afternoon, an elegant woman in her 50s approached the counter. Helena recognized her immediately. Beatrice Montgomery, owner of one of the most prestigious art galleries in the Upper East Side, and an occasional customer of the boutique. "Helena, it's such a shame to hear you're closing," Beatrice said with genuine dismay. "Your boutique was one of the few in New York with true taste." "Thank you, Beatrice. Unfortunately, sometimes circumstances—" "Helena, can I make a proposal?" Beatrice interrupted. "I've been looking for a fashion consultant for gallery events for months. Someone, with a refined eye who understands both style and art. Would you be interested? The proposal caught Helena completely off guard. I don't know what to say. Think about it. It would be freelance work initially, but with potential to grow and... Beatrice hesitated. I can assure you that the fees are quite attractive. That night, with the boutique empty and most of the stock sold, Helena sat on the floor of the main salon, her back against the counter. The silence was strange. For the first time in 20 years, there was no constant hum of the air conditioning, no conversations from customers, no constant movement that characterized her business. Caroline appeared with a bottle of cheap champagne and 2 plastic cups. Mrs. Smith, I think we need to toast. Toast to what? Failure? Toast to courage, Caroline said, filling the cups. You had the courage to build this place. You had the courage to fight for it until the end. And now you are having the courage to start over. This is not failure, it is strength. They toasted in the middle of the empty boutique, and for the first time in months, Helena felt something akin to hope. The next day, she called Beatrice Montgomery and accepted the consulting offer. She also put the boutique up for sale, not as an admission of defeat, but as a conscious choice to move forward. The biggest surprise came a week later, when her phone rang with a number she recognized immediately. Helena. Richard's voice sounded different, more distant, but not hostile. Richard, she replied, her heart racing, I heard you're selling the boutique. How did you find out? Sarah told me. Helena, can we talk in person? They arranged to meet in Central Park the following Saturday. When Helena arrived at the agreed spot, a bench near the lake, Richard was already there, feeding the ducks with pieces of bread. He looked thinner, his hair a bit grayer, but his eyes still carried the same tenderness that had won her over decades ago. How are you? He asked as she sat down beside him. Honestly? Lost? Scared? But also relieved, in a way. Relieved? For finally facing the consequences of my choices instead of trying to control them. Richard was silent for a few minutes, watching the ducks in the water. Helena, these 2 months away from you were the hardest of my life. For me too. But they were also necessary. I needed to understand some things about us, about myself, about what I really want. Helena felt her heart race. And what do you want? Richard turned to look at her. I want my wife back. I want our family back. But I want the real Helena, not the woman haunted by the ghosts of the past who was living in our home. Richard, I don't know if I can promise that I've completely changed. I'm not asking for perfection, he interrupted. I'm asking for honesty. I'm asking that when you're scared, you tell me. When you have doubts, you ask me. When you need reassurance, you ask me, instead of creating elaborate tests. Helena nodded, tears streaming down her face. Can I ask you for something? Of course. Help me start over, not just the boutique, not just our financial life. Help me start over as a person. Richard smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen in months. Only if you let me start over with you. They left the park hand in hand, knowing that the road ahead would be different from anything they had experienced before, but finally willing to walk it together, without maps or guarantees, just trust in each other. The autumn of 2025 brought changes that Helena could never have imagined. The sale of the boutique had been finalized, and with the money, they managed to pay off the most urgent debts, although there was still a long way to go for complete financial recovery. Richard had come back home, but they both knew that rebuilding trust would be a gradual process. The new routine was radically different. Helena worked as a fashion consultant for Beatrice Montgomery's gallery, a job that challenged her, intellectually in ways the boutique never had. Instead of selling clothes, she now created visual concepts for exhibitions, coordinated the visuals for cultural events, and advised collectors on curating their wardrobes for special occasions. "Mum, you look younger," Sarah commented one Saturday afternoon while they were having lunch at her apartment. Her belly was already quite noticeable at 6 months pregnant, and Daniel had moved in permanently after finalizing his divorce. "Could it be because I've finally stopped carrying the weight of trying to control everyone's life?" Helena laughed, watching how her daughter radiated happiness despite all the complications of her situation. Daniel entered the room, coming back from a work meeting. In the months following the discovery of their relationship, Helena had gotten to know him as a person, not just as the detective she had hired. He was kind, dedicated, and clearly in love with Sarah. "Helena," he said, sitting at the table, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure. How did you and Richard manage to reconcile after everything that happened? Sarah always talks as if it was simple, but I imagine it wasn't." Helena exchanged a glance with her daughter before answering. "It wasn't simple. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I had to learn the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation." "What's the difference?" Sarah asked, curious. "Forgiveness is something you give to free yourself from the past. Reconciliation is something you build to create a new future. Richard forgave me relatively quickly, but reconciliation that we are building day by day." The conversation was interrupted by Helena's phone. It was Beatrice Montgomery, and by her tone, something important had happened. "Helena, I need you to come to the gallery urgently. We have a situation." An hour later, Helena was in the elegant space of the gallery in Upper East Side, observing a scene that left her completely confused. Beatrice was in a tense conversation with a blonde woman around 45, impeccably dressed and with a determined expression that Helena recognized immediately. It was Patricia Miller, Dr. Paul's ex-wife. "Helena," Beatrice approached, clearly embarrassed. "This is Patricia Miller. She is interested in hiring your services as a personal consultant." Helena greeted Patricia politely, but inside she felt a knot in her stomach. She hadn't spoken to Dr. Paul since the farce of the surgery and knew he was facing serious problems with the medical board. "Mrs. Smith," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I've heard great things about your work. I'm going through a transition period in my life, and I need to completely renew my look." "What kind of transition?" Helena asked cautiously. "I'm getting a divorce, and I want to make sure that when I show up at social events, everyone sees a strong, independent, and successful woman." The proposal sounded legitimate, but something... Helena's suspicion was piqued by Patricia's tone. "May I ask how you found out about my work?" "Oh, New York is a small city in the right circles. Someone mentioned that you had a special eye for delicate situations." Beatrice apologized and stepped away to attend to another client, leaving Helena alone with Patricia. It was then that the conversation took a completely different turn. "Actually, Mrs. Smith, I didn't come here to hire fashion consulting," Patricia said, her tone changing completely. "I came because I need your help with my ex-husband." "I don't understand." "Of course you do. You know exactly what Paul did to you during that surgery, and you know he is being investigated by the medical board." Helena's heart raced. "Mrs. Miller, I don't know what you're talking about." "Please don't underestimate me," Patricia interrupted. "I know about the scam surrounding the surgery. Paul confessed everything when he found out he was going to be investigated, and I know you are the only person who can confirm or deny the allegations against him." Helena fell silent, trying to process where this conversation was headed. "I'll be direct," Patricia continued. "I'm divorcing Paul, and in the division of assets, I need to prove that he engaged in unethical conduct that jeopardizes his professional assets. If you testify, against him in the board's hearing, confirming that he participated in a medical scam, I can secure a much more favorable division of the assets. And what if I don't testify? Patricia's smile turned icy. Then perhaps I will need to mention to certain people that the famous fashion consultant Helena Smith had an active role in a medical fraud. I can only imagine how that would affect your new career. It was blackmail. Pure and simple. Mrs. Miller, I need to think about this, Helena said, trying to keep her voice steady. Of course, but don't take too long. Paul's hearing is next week. That night, Helena told Richard everything. They were in the kitchen of the house, preparing dinner together, a new tradition they had adopted since their reconciliation. So that's it, Richard said, chopping vegetables for the salad. The bill has finally come due. What do you mean? Helena, ever since you pulled that scam during the surgery, I knew the consequences would show up eventually. You can't involve Paul in something like that and expect there to be no repercussions. But he's been my friend for 15 years. And you put him in an impossible situation. Now, he is paying the price, and you need to decide if you will take your share of the responsibility. Helena stopped chopping tomatoes and looked at her husband. Do you think I should testify against him? I think you should do what is right, regardless of the consequences for you. And what if that destroys my new career? What if no one wants to hire me anymore? Richard stopped what he was doing and moved closer to her. Helena, you spent months testing if I truly loved you. Now life is testing whether you have truly changed. The question is, will you choose to do the right thing even if it's hard, or will you continue trying to protect yourself at the expense of others? The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. It was Mary, the first time she had called since the tense reconciliation they had months ago. Helena, Mary's voice sounded tense, I need to talk to you. It's about Dr. Paul. They arranged to meet the next day at the same cafe where they used to gather before all the chaos. Mary arrived on time, but Helena immediately noticed the changes, deep, dark circles under her eyes, her hands trembling slightly, an overall tension she had never seen in her friend. Mary, are you okay? No, Helena, I'm not okay, Mary replied directly. The pharmacy board has temporarily suspended me. I'm being investigated for making irregular contacts with labs. Guilt hit Helena like a wave. Mary, this is because of me. No, Helena, this is because of choices I consciously made, but I need to tell you something about Dr. Paul. What? He's being blackmailed. Patricia is using information about patients to pressure doctors who have treated her over the years. The case of your surgery is just one of many she is using. Helena was shocked. How do you know this? Because she approached me too. She offered me money to testify that Paul asked me to obtain medications illegally for patients. When I refused, she said she would make sure I lost my license permanently. The dimension of the situation began to become clear to Helena. This was not just about her scam during the surgery, but a pattern of behavior from Patricia Miller. Mary, what are you going to do? I'm going to testify in favor of Paul at the hearing. I will tell the truth about Patricia's attempts at blackmail, even knowing that this could worsen my own situation. Why? Mary smiled for the first time in the conversation. Because I learned from a friend that sometimes doing the right thing is more important than protecting yourself, even when that friend took some time to learn the same lesson. Helena understood the message. Mary, will you ever forgive me? I already forgave you, Helena. The question is, will you be able to forgive yourself? That night, Helena made the hardest decision of her life. She called Dr. Paul's lawyer and offered to testify in his defense, telling the whole truth about the surgery scam, about how she had pressured a friend to participate in her paranoia, and about Patricia's attempts at blackmail. Helena, Richard said when she told him her decision. "I'm proud of you. Even knowing I might lose everything again? Especially knowing that. You are finally choosing to do the right thing for the sake of doing what is right, not to control the outcome." The hearing would be on Monday. Helena had the weekend to prepare for the consequences of finally taking full responsibility for her actions. Spring arrived in New York with its characteristic explosion of purple and yellow blossoms, and she came to the resolution of all the conflicts that had marked the last 14 months of Helena's life. Dr. Paul's hearing had taken place the previous week, and the outcome surprised everyone involved. Helena had presented herself to the medical board with a complete and detailed confession. She spoke about her paranoia regarding the marriage, how she pressured Dr. Paul to participate in the scam of the surgery, and about Patricia's attempts at blackmail. Mary also testified, revealing the predatory behavior pattern of the doctor's ex-wife. The result was unexpected. Dr. Paul received only a formal warning, considering that he acted under the emotional coercion of a patient in a vulnerable psychological state. Patricia, on the other hand, was reported to the district attorney's office for attempted extortion and blackmail. "I never thought that confessing my mistakes would bring me so much peace," Helena commented to Richard as they walked through Central Park on a sunny September morning. "For months I lived in fear of the consequences, and when I finally faced them, I found they were much smaller than I imagined." "Maybe because when we do the right thing, the universe conspires in our favor," Richard replied, squeezing her hand. Helena's career as a fashion consultant not only survived the scandal, but thrived. The courageous way she took responsibility impressed Beatrice Montgomery and other clients, who began to see her as an honest and reliable person. Contracts had multiplied, and she was now working with some of the top galleries and cultural events in New York. They stopped near the lake, at the same bench where they reconciled months ago. "Richard," Helena said, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "How did you manage to forgive me so completely? I tested your love in the cruelest way possible, destroyed our financial stability, put our friends at risk." Richard was silent for a few seconds, watching the ducks in the water. "Helena, do you want to know the truth?" "Always." "That night at the hospital when I thought you had died, I didn't just feel pain from the loss, I felt guilt." "Guilt?" "Guilt because in the last years I had stopped showing you how much I loved you. I had stopped being romantic, stopped being emotionally present. I thought 25 years of marriage gave me the right to relax, to take our love for granted." Helena looked at him in surprise. "Richard, you have always been a wonderful husband." "I was a responsible husband, a good provider, a reliable partner. But I had stopped being the man you fell in love with. When I found out about your autoimmune disease and saw how vulnerable you were, I realized that maybe your paranoia wasn't completely unfounded. Maybe you were feeling that I had emotionally distanced myself." The revelation caught Helena completely off guard. "Are you saying you feel responsible for my paranoia?" "I'm saying that a relationship is a construction of two people. Your actions were extreme and wrong, but maybe they were the only way you knew to ask me to court you again." They walked in silence until they reached the park's plant nursery. There, sitting on a bench surrounded by bromeliads and orchids, Richard continued, "Helena, do you want to know what really made me come back home?" "What?" "It was realizing that you had finally stopped trying to test me and started working on yourself. When I knew you were taking responsibility for your actions, testifying at the hearing, even knowing you could lose everything, that's when I knew the woman I married had returned. And if I have trust issues again, then you will tell me, and we will solve it together. No tests, no secret investigations, no elaborate scams, just talking like two people who love each other. At that moment, Helena's phone rang. It was Sarah, and from the anxiety in her voice, something important was happening. "Mum, I'm at the hospital. The baby is coming." 2 hours later, Helena and Richard were at St. Luke's Hospital in the maternity waiting room, along with Daniel, who was nervously pacing back and forth. "Daniel, sit down," Richard said, amused by the future father's nervousness. "First babies always take a while." "But she wasn't even fully 9 months yet," Daniel replied, clearly in a panic. Dr. Miller, not Paul, but his gynecologist brother, appeared in the waiting room with a smile on his face. "It's a girl. Mother and baby are perfectly healthy." Daniel's cry of relief was audible throughout the waiting room. When they finally got to see Sarah and their granddaughter, Helena felt an emotion unlike anything she had ever experienced. The little Sophia, name chosen by Sarah, was perfect, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's face shape. "Mom," Sarah said, still exhausted but radiant, "thank you for teaching me to be brave." "Did I teach you that?" Helena asked, surprised. "You showed me that true love isn't about having guarantees. It's about having the courage to give yourself even without them. And you showed me that making mistakes isn't the end of the world, as long as we learn from them." 3 months later, on New Year's Eve, the family gathered at Sarah and Daniel's apartment for dinner. Sophia slept in the portable crib in the living room while the adults toasted the new year. "I want to make a toast," Helena said, raising her champagne glass, "to the most difficult and transformative year of our lives." "And to what we learned," Richard added. "What did we learn?" Sarah asked. "That love is a daily act of courage," Helena replied. "That trust isn't the absence of doubts, but the choice to believe in the best of the people we love, even when we are afraid. And that family isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness and starting over," Daniel added. Mary, who had been invited to dinner, as a final gesture of reconciliation, raised her glass, and that sometimes we lose some things to gain even better ones. Her professional situation had resolved favorably. The testimony about Patricia's attempts at blackmail completely exonerated her, and the pharmacy board not only lifted the suspension but also praised her for her courage in reporting unethical practices. At midnight, when the fireworks lit up the sky over New York, Helena was on the balcony of the apartment, Sophia in her arms, watching the city that had always been her home, but which she now saw with completely different eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, approaching her. "I'm thinking that a year ago, at this same time, I was obsessed with finding out if you loved me. Today, I know that the important question was never whether you love me." "And what was the important question?" Helena smiled, adjusting her granddaughter in her arms. "The important question was, am I capable of loving without fear? And the answer is yes. Finally, after 52 years, I have learned to love without fear." Richard kissed her gently, and in the reflection of the window, Helena saw the image of a family. 3 generations of women learning, each in their own way, that true love is not about having all the answers, but about having the courage to ask the right questions. The aroma of New York coffee on summer mornings, the constant noise of traffic, the vibrant colors of cherry blossoms that would bloom again in a few months, everything took on new meanings. She realized that the test she had taken did not reveal her husband's infidelity, but her own inability to recognize true love when she saw it. The 14-month journey not only saved her marriage, but taught her that trust is not the absence of doubts, but the choice to love despite them. In the end, she understood that asking the doctor to simulate her death was not a test for her husband, but a journey of self-discovery. Each person in her life, husband, daughter, best friend, even the dishonest doctor, played essential roles in her personal growth. What she interpreted as betrayal were, in fact, acts of love and protection. The lost boutique transformed into creative freedom. The financial crisis revealed the strength of true companionship. The marriage she tested not only survived, but evolved into something deeper and more authentic. They learned that loving means choosing to be present in difficult moments, even when the other person is not watching. The story ended with her understanding that the greatest gift she could give herself and her husband was trust, not as a state of mind, but as a daily decision to believe in the best of the people she loves.